Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 10-minute Bible lesson. Well, we've been doing our Bible lessons from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And today we're going to look at another teaching of Jesus. In fact, some call this teaching the law of retaliation. Have you ever heard of the law of retaliation? Let me ask you this. Have you ever retaliated against someone? I don't know. Well, that's actually found in the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verse 24. And you can look that up if you want to. And when I read what Jesus says, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and read it. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 and 39. Here's what he said. He says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Remember that? I think almost everyone has heard of that and knows about that. And then he says this, he says, "But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also." Now, we've all heard that too. There's probably not hardly anybody or very few people that haven't heard of that. Can you just pause a minute and think about that? What an amazing statement. This is an incredibly amazing statement that Jesus makes. And it goes against everything about us almost. If you could just picture how you might feel if someone slapped you in the face. Well, you would be angry and outraged and you'd want to do something about it. Well, Jesus tells us what we're supposed to do, and it doesn't go according to our nature. He says we're supposed to turn the other cheek. Now, the law of retaliation, it provided a judicial principle that made the punishment fit the crime. So an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But listen, it was never intended to permit men to take personal vengeance on someone. So I think we need to understand that. And I think in this teaching also, at least this is just my opinion, I don't personally think that Jesus was saying that we're not supposed to defend our family or defend our country. But I think what's being said is that we're not to take personal vengeance. Now, what is it that Jesus was saying when he was talking about personal conflicts? What was it we were supposed to do? Well, he says this. He says we're not supposed to resist evil. In fact, he says we're even supposed to turn the other cheek. And that's not the only place in the New Testament. I believe over in Romans it says that we're not to return evil for evil. And there's another place that says that you overcome evil by providing good. So that's a kind of an interesting thing, I think. So let's go ahead and see what else Jesus says about this. And this is in Matthew chapter 5, verses 40 and 41. Here's what he says. He says, "If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, the Wycliffe Bible Commentary, it has a comment in there about this passage, and it says this, that Jesus was giving his disciples answers about how to respond to 4 common things that happen to most people. What are those 4 common things? The first one is personal assaults. The second one is lawsuits. And the third one is like government regulation or a compulsory regulation. And then the fourth thing was begging. What do you do when people beg and ask you for something? Well, the tunic was a garment that was worn on the inside next to your body, and it was worn under the cloak. Now, the cloak was the outer garment, and it was the more expensive garment. Now, I read where the outer garment sometimes was used for a bed covering. And to me, that makes sense because in the Old Testament, it forbids a person to keep another person's cloak for security or payment overnight. Now, I've also read in another commentary where the Jews had this ideal during Jesus' time that when they wanted to retaliate against an offender, what they would do is that they would go through the arms of the law. Now just think about that. Do you think that happens today? Of course it happens today. It happens all the time today. And it especially happened during Jesus' time. And the reason why is because that nation was under the domination of a foreign power, that is the Roman Empire, rule over Palestine. Now Jesus taught his disciples that if a person was to take your cloak or take your tunic, then let him have the cloak also. And I think that's really amazing, isn't it? That's not all he said. He also said something regarding going 2 miles. Most of us have heard about that, and I have something written down about this, and I want to read it to you because I think it's really important. In fact, I may read it to you twice. So government agents were in a position to compel forced service upon a subjugated people. Let me read that again. Government agents were in a position to compel forced service upon a subjugated people. Now, what did that mean? It meant a Roman soldier, for example, could compel a Jewish native, like, to carry his armor or some material if he needed to and needed the relief and he needed the help. It was perfectly all right for him to compel a Jew to carry his armor or some of his material for 1 mile. Now, if you can imagine that, the Jews probably hated to do that. I'm sure that they did. What did Jesus say? Did Jesus tell them that's what he was supposed to do? No. Jesus says this: if this happens, don't just go the legally obligated 1 mile, but go 2 miles. Isn't that an amazing thing? And that's where we get the statement that everybody knows, and that is, go the extra mile. It's where it came from. So Jesus is teaching us to have, where we can, where it doesn't violate our relationship with God, that we're to work under the cooperation of human authority. And not only when we do that, but when we do that, we can also perform a great witness for our Christianity. So those are some of the things that Jesus taught. Now let's look at the last thing, and then we'll close. So in Matthew 5, verse 42, here's what Jesus says. He says, "Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." So generosity is the opposite of being stingy. So our God is a generous and giving God. And we see that in John 3:16, where he says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." So if we want to be like God, then we need to learn to be generous. And that kind of goes against our nature as well. We need to be generous. And how do we do that? When somebody asks us something, ask us to give them something, then go ahead and be generous and do that. And not only that, if somebody wants to borrow something from us, to go ahead and be willing to loan it to us, even to the point where we don't ask them to return it. That is to say, we don't make them pay us back. If they decide to, fine, and if they don't, just fine. So if you look at this right here, this really goes against what people consider practical in managing their money affairs and taking care of their wealth. But the thing about it is, anyway, Jesus taught us to be generous. And I think that when we are generous and when we are giving in the name of the Lord, then the return from it will be multiplied to us. That way God will bless us in so many other ways. So I think it's a great lesson. So the law of retaliation. Hey, thank you for tuning in with us today. We appreciate it. We hope you have a really good week, and tune in next time.